The one term I didn't put on here that I should have mentioned is basically a nuisance species, because oftentimes invasive and nuisance gets thrown around and pretty much either paired up or they are basically transposed in a sense. So those native nuisance species may or may not be native, but they do cause that same type of harm. So I like to make my presentations a little entertaining, but I came across this little cartoon and I figured, hey, it works really well actually. So why are invasives so bad? They are the leading threat to native wildlife. They're spread oftentimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally by human activity. I've got one example that I'll talk about a little bit more in detail when we get there. That was intentionally brought over for human activity, basically. Oftentimes they're very aggressive. They're a species that can just, put their hooks into something and just take over. Oftentimes they lack natural predators. They reproduce rapidly. They're highly adaptive to new environments. Although this is not for all invasive species, but most of what we've seen with invasive species introduced into an area, they're usually able to take over those areas.
That's what I said.
They compete with native species for food, water, and space. They're potential disease vectors. Also, there's other notations of other human risk, human health risk involved. And I've got an example of that one a little bit later. They have been noted to contribute to the extinction of certain species. They're considered biological wildfires because basically once they get started, they take off and it's really difficult to control them. And then that's where they come in as an economic pitfall because the costs to control them are substantial. So basically, here are the breakdowns of the impacts. The first one we're going to talk about is predation. Invasive predators have indicated to have predated and caused extinctions of 87 bird species, 45 mammal species, and 10 reptile species. That's not even mentioning, the aquatic species that have been impacted. Competition, competitive advantages they have high germination rates, good survival rates, fast growing. They may have an alternate flowering regime, so they may stay growing a lot longer than most of our native species. And the outcome of competition is dependent on the environmental context. So if it's an area that is very similar to a lot of their natural habitat from wherever they came from, taking over is probably not going to be that difficult. Hybridization, it's suggested that it contributes to extinction because it causes no pure genes of that native species. Other suggestions are that offspring can be more potent than the original species. The example of that would be the African killer bees, which was first ID'd in Brazil in the 1950s, discovered in California in the 80s, mid 80s, and now have permanent colonies found in South California, South Nevada, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, West Louisiana, West Arkansas, and Central and South Florida. Health risk, introduction of new diseases. They serve as vectors for diseases, and then they cause all kinds of ailments or injuries from their bee stings, allergens, and other toxins. But the most dangerous component of an invasive species is being a carrier of that disease. So the example there would be mosquitoes. I mean, they have been linked to numbers and numbers of diseases. Habitat alterations, they basically modify the physical environment to improve its own performance, basically. It takes over that area, oftentimes taking over the area, choking out native species, and encroaching into new areas. The complications is that the other species and humans assist in that spread of those species, either intentionally or unintentionally. And then interactions. Interactions can hinder or promote another species' success, oftentimes more of a hindrance. Interactions can amplify or mitigate one another's impacts on ecosystems. So an example here, actually, I wanted to bring up is probably a little bit more of a benefit for an invasive species, but I've personally seen areas where wild pigs would come in, root up an area, and leave it pretty much barren. And then a year later, you go back to that same area, and you've actually had the opportunity for native, and I'm going to mention swamp cane because this is the example that I'm basing it on. I've seen a spread in the swamp cane in those areas. The bad thing about it is if it was an invasive species that was in that area that they rooted up, then you'd probably have the same example, only in a more negative effect. So these are basically the threats to native wildlife. You see the direct threats there, and you see the indirect, and a lot of it we've covered quite a bit. The indirect threats is basically a change to the food web by choking out or replacing native food species. Invasive species can alter the abundance or diversity of species that are important habitat for natural resources. They are also capable of changing the condition, oftentimes changing soil chemistry or changing things like the intensity of fire if a fire breaks out in that area. An example here in Mississippi is like Kogan grass. Kogan grass takes over our fields, especially after an individual has come through and bush hogged that area, but they may have bush hogged an area previously that contained Kogan grass. They bring it back in, it spreads, it takes off. And then if we burn those areas, it burns at such a hotter temperature that it actually destroys the area and continues to encroach into new areas. So quickly, some of our examples I'm going to mention. Some of these examples are here in Choctaw, and others are some of the more nationally proclaimed invasive species that people know about. This one here is a problem we have in Choctaw. Chinese privet. They form dense thickets that replace native species. They mature rapidly. They're prolific seed producers, extremely difficult to eradicate because of that reproductive capability. And there are no known biological controls. So the photo on the right is one of our experimental swamp cane areas, or river cane. I'll revert back and forth to river cane, swamp cane. In the back there, you can see Chinese privet. This is an area that was recently excavated to be able to try to get down and permanently remove some of the Chinese privet by hand. And if any of you ever had to deal with these types of areas, you know that that can be a very time consuming and very labor intensive project to do. Another invasive species we have here in Mississippi, this is kudzu. You notice kudzu, when it takes over, it takes over. Brought in from Japan as an ornamental plant. So this is one that humans actually brought into the area. It was also used in the Southeast as a means of erosion control and a food source for grazing animals. But because of their reproductive capabilities and their growing capabilities, this plant can grow as rapid as 1 foot a day. And then these thick mats prevent sunlight from penetrating into the existing forest, oftentimes killing the trees and other vegetations that it covers. So it's been nicknamed the vine that ate the South. And this is definitely an issue that we deal with on tribal lands here, taking over a lot of our forest areas. Our third one, fire ants. If you've ever been stung or bit by a fire ant, I guarantee you know it. That painful and sting that they do does pack a wallop. And then sometimes if you develop scratches or infections, there can be some kind of scarring there. It's noted that around 2% of people can actually develop anaphylactic shock to these bites. So this is a species that this is a species that we are concerned about as far as an additional health risk to humans. As far as the environment itself, they are vulnerable to attacking newborn livestock that hit the ground, poultry that are around the areas. We had an incident where fire ants grew mounds next to one of our chicken houses. So there was an issue there with poultry. They interfere and displace native wildlife like young birds and lizards. I mean, anything that's on the ground. They're very territorial. So if you stomp anywhere near them, they're on the defense already. They are very durable in building these ant rafts. If you see on the right side, those photos there. So they're able to move along waterways. So if you're trying to control them by trying to drown them, you're actually probably expanding their territory. The other side of it is foraging ants can actually clog up irrigation waterways or water lines and electrical lines. So they can always create that havoc and hazard there. One of our more nationally known species of invasives is the Burmese python, top predators in the Everglades, slowly creeping closer and closer in the Southeast. They were either released knowingly by pet owners that can no longer take care of them, or they either were escaped into the swamps. One example of that is Hurricane Andrew that actually destroyed a python breeding facility, and those species basically were released into the swamps, and then lo and behold, they took over. They're noted because they have decimated mammal and bird populations. They're capable of consuming deer and alligators. So they are definitely an invasive species that take over havoc. They outcompete native species for food and other resources. They have flexible diets, so they can actually survive long periods without food. Highly reproductive, rapid sexual development, and just the longevity of life in general makes them a species that has to be constantly controlled every day. Lastly, one of my favorites is the wild pigs. They will eat just about anything in their path. They compete with native species, obviously, for food, like acorns, tubers, earthworms, things like that. They predate on native species like fawns or nurse ground birds. And the mention of alligators, I have personally found wild pigs rooting around in an alligator nest. And so them having natural predators outside of humans makes them an animal that is really a challenge, especially with their biological capabilities. They're dropping babies at 6 months, and not just a couple of babies, but a number of babies, and they're spreading through and rooting up things like crazy. Another concern with them is they carry diseases that impact livestock and humans. So that's just another, I don't want to say shrimp on the Barbie, but that's just another thing we have to worry about. So generally, what can we do if we find invasive species? The first thing is identify what you have. You have to inventory your areas, because if you don't know you have it until you find it, basically. Then you want to mark those areas, and then you want to look at the best ways of control, or at least some kind of minimization project. Chinese privet has been very hectic for us in Choctaw, because right now the best way that we found to control it is by the actual hands-on rutting through all this stuff and pulling it up. But again, time consuming, labor intensive, and you don't get very many volunteers that are willing to do that. So that's the nitty gritty of it. So is there any questions? And I threw this little cartoon out of there because we're at the end of the presentation, but also I could just see some of our native species thinking the same thing when they see invasives taking over. So is anyone there?
We're here. Anybody else?
Okay. I don't have the screen to see anyone, so I was like, okay, maybe I'm just talking.
Yeah, you can, if you stop screen sharing, you'll it'll pop back to normal, Mitzi.
Okay. All right, there we go. I'll go ahead and put my face back up there.
Corey's hiding behind Julie.
Yep.
I see that.
So Mitzi, you were talking about the cultural plants. Are there also cultural species that you guys are seeing impacts from, or adverse impacts from? Wildlife, not plants.
Wildlife, we're starting to see very small, deer is a cultural species for us, basically, because we utilize it for not only food, but for some of the artisan things, the skin for certain things. So we're starting to see the obvious impacts as far as competition. We found areas, but if we have pigs there, chances are we don't have the deer there. So we're seeing them being displaced, pushed out. So we're seeing that. And then some of our birds that we utilize for arts, we're starting to see them either be impacted by the rooting or digging into the nest, so forth, so on. So we're starting to see that. We're not seeing them in substantial issues, but we're starting to see those impacts.
Okay, and then as far as like you were talking about the wild, your prescribed firework and not seeing a response that's not favorable for getting the sugarcane back, is it because it's too hot and it's changing the soil structures?
That, and if it's an area that was impacted by Kogan grass, it just makes the fire so hot, so intensive that it's probably going to destroy the plant in itself. So we're seeing all of that. We haven't had any actual tests on what the soil composition looks like in those areas after fire and before fire.
Okay, it might also be burning too hot for the seeds, the seed
True.
beds.
True.
Great, thank you, Mitz.
Anybody else?
Yeah, we're just saying there's a lot of similarities, Mitzi, even though the species change. Like in the West, it's a cheatgrass thing. Exactly the same scenario, the invades, high intensity fires, completely alters or permanently changes ecosystems, especially in the same country. Different plants, but the same results. And of course, there's kudzu. I'm pretty sure it's in Oregon and Washington as well now.
It maybe, I know kudzu just carries over all over here.
Yeah,
We had an area that we were going to do timber sale in, but once they sprayed the kudzu to destroy some of it, once they got to the timber, they found out the timber wasn't harvestable.
Jeez. Yep, same invade. Just this is such a large topic for everybody across the country.
It is, and I wanted to make it somewhat general because we have a few examples, but we don't have that many examples, and so I wanted to make the talk somewhat general, just because, like I said, we're covering so many areas. So, and I know sometimes I speak at like 90 to nothing, so sometimes people have to reel me back. But if I don't keep my notes, we'll be talking off topic all over the place. So.
Yeah, well, later we have a webinar planned later to kind of talk about some of the other species in the Southeast that are spreading northward. Like pigs are already in Canada. We got feral pigs north of the United States now, but there's all those odd little, and some of them are big, the lizard species that are
Right.
have been introduced. Some of the other snakes. With climate change, we're probably going to see their entire range move northward on the continent, and
well, we're also seeing species. We haven't seen it in Choctaw, but in Mississippi has been noted as seeing a couple of scorpion species moving this eastward. So
non-native scorpions.
Right.
Yeah, no kidding. So yeah, I got another weird story. So I was in Iraq. I was in the army and served in Iraq. And then they have those big wind spiders or wind scorpions there, the kind of a tailless scorpion species. I found one of those in my house in California, like years later. Now, there's some native ones, but I think they're kind of small. And the one I found was great big, like the ones in Iraq. I tried to catch it and ID it, but it got away from me. But
You brought it back.
yeah, right. Now, 20 years after I came home from Iraq, you've been hiding in my sleeping bag a long time. But
Is there anything else that any other participants have that you have invasive species that are encroaching on any endangered species in your area? How about Jimmy Jackson?
I got a funny story. I don't know. So last year, because our tribe has hunting rights and stuff. So last year during hunting season, a buddy of mine, he was hunting and he came across like 50 pigs. And he thought they were feral pigs, so he shot one. And he calls me, and turns out there was a pig farmer that lived out in the area that couldn't take care of the pigs anymore, so he just let them go. And so then there was a bunch of people out there looking for these pigs, and everybody thought they were feral pigs, and we found out it was just a pig farmer that couldn't take care of his pigs anymore.
that's how that
I don't
happened.
know if they made it through the winter.
That's step one, is can't take care of them anymore. That we've seen people that have had pens in their yard, and they just didn't either maintain the fence, or they just couldn't take care of them, let them go. And these species, even a domestic pig, they can revert to a wild acting species in no time.
Yeah.
But when he mentioned coming across pigs and thinking they're wild, I was out in the woods one day and come across about 30 head of cattle. So for a while there, I was scratching my head wondering if it was a feral cattle group, but turns out there was a guy across the river, and his cows got out. So we had to round them up.
Jason.
How about you, Jason?
Well, we've got a number of different issues as far as invasive species. Our tribe is currently working on Japanese knotweed and how they're running up and down on our valley, and certain areas we're getting a handle on, but the problem is it gets down further down and people don't realize how quickly they spread. They drive over it, they go and dig them up and think that they're taken care of once they're done, and then all of a sudden it's all over their equipment. And then an area that we fix, it gets picked up and transported in because somebody decides to bring their tractor over because another area that they tilled over the knotweed, and then all of a sudden it's growing over again. And because those suck a lot of the oxygen out of our water and our river system. And then you throw in green crab that's kind of coming into the area that's hitting the whole Puget Sound area and have an impact on all our Dungeness crabs and everything else. And then we have a farmer in the, or Atlantic salmon farmer who's just now converting over to steelhead now, but he had a net pen that had Atlantic salmon he was raising before. The net pen broke, and those started running up and down the Puget Sound all the way up to the Canadian border, or up past Canada, all the way down south in Nisqually, and then we were catching them all the way up in the river system and eating some of the fry and some of that stuff. They were saying that they didn't eat any of the fish, and they only ate the food and stuff like that there. So that's one of the things that we're having to deal with. And kind of touching on some of the other subjects of the reintroduction of other species before we even fix the food for them in the area, because we got some elk that are being impacted because there's discussion of bringing in grizzlies and all this other stuff, bringing them down from Canada. And so our tribe and some of the other tribes are having the same issues, and as it relates to that those kind of impacts as well. And I started thinking of all these different subjects as I was kind of watching the stuff, and it's like bringing thoughts in my head as it relates to this stuff. So I didn't quite catch everything. I guess that's it for now.
Yeah, so Jason, we record these so that once we're done with this, we'll pull the link down and put it on the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society website, so you can watch it again if you want to. Okay,
sounds good.
And then I actually have a question for you. I remember when that salmon thing happened and the farm salmon got away. Did any populations establish, or did they get caught up? What happened with those?
I'm not exactly sure at this point if there is any that did establish themselves. Probably be coming back sometime here within this year, next year. But I know there was a huge impact. I know there's tribes that were catching them on their river systems, and like up at Nooksack or all the way down as far as south of Nisqually and those areas where they were catching the fish that were in the river system and stuff, besides being in the Puget Sound. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, in the thousands, and they were trying to say that they only had a couple hundred that got away at first initially.
Right. I remember it turned out to be thousands of them, and when it actually came out. Yeah. Okay. Aaron, anybody else have anything else? Aaron or Neil, Shannon, to share? Questions?
Yeah, this is Aaron. Just coming from the Southwest, it's always the tamarisk or the Russian olive or even the Chinese elm here is, our biggest issue that we have with invasive plants. But, once you go up into the higher elevations, then we have the, feral cattle and horses as well that are degrading our lands up in the higher elevations. But no, it's just interesting to hear, what other regions of the country and other tribes are dealing with, and always something similar, but different species that always impact other tribes. But with Mitzi, do you get BIA funding to try to treat these invasive species?
We have had some funding in the past. Our biggest issue as far as when it comes to funding is we're so short staffed. So if we keep loading up on funding sources, we don't have the opportunity to actually get much of the work done. So we hit them from time to time when we're capable of doing the work. Right now, I'm only working with 3 other wildlife officers. So
okay.
Yeah, so we get a little overwhelmed sometime, but yeah, we do avail funding when we're capable of getting things done.
Good to hear. Yeah, and same thing with us. We're building capacity here to get more tribal members employed and get more acres treated as well. But we do what we can. With what we got. But yeah, that's all I got.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, Mitzi, thank you for the presentation. One of the invasives that we fail to talk about quite often is the human population. Here in north central Idaho, or just in the state of Idaho, for example, just in the last 30 years, the population, human population has gone from about 700,000 to 1.7 million. That has a significant impact, adverse impact on the landscape. But, you know, getting back to what we all refer to as invasives, some of the problems that you mentioned, Mitzi, and from the Southwest there, you know, we're not unlike any place else. We just have different species of invasives as far as plants. Cheatgrass, one of the bromes, is one of our big problems here in dry grassland habitats, really having an impact on grazing big game species. And of course, a lot of our ground nesting birds and whatnot. This grass is taking over some of the shrub steppe type habitats. We've also had novel diseases that have been introduced here through domestic livestock, and one in particular is the Mycoplasma ovi pneumoniae that is upper respiratory flora that is hosted by domestic sheep and domestic goats. Of course, here in the West, we have a lot of public land grazing using cattle to graze, as well as domestic sheep. Those domestic sheep have proven to be very deadly to our native bighorn sheep populations. You know, it was, I think at the time of settlement in the West, European settlement, there was estimated about 2 million bighorn sheep in Western North America. That population has been greatly diminished. I think there's 80 or 90,000 bighorn sheep left in Western North America. And most of that reduction currently is being held up by introduced diseases from domestic sheep grazing. So I'll just touch on that real quick. I wanted to throw that out there as these novel disease agents that are coming in are a big problem as well. Thank you.
Great. Shannon, you'd be the last one.
I would have to echo Neil's comments on it, both for cheatgrass and the pneumonia for bighorns. But also we've got a new invader that has kind of arrived in the last 10 years for wiregrass is ventonata, taking over a lot of the grazing lands. Kind of snuck in under the radar. No one really knew what it was until it had exploded. Pretty tough to get rid of. Very expensive to spray out. And taking over a lot of land. And with the transfer of the National Bison Range back to the tribes, there's concerns with that out there, because that's one of the first places I saw it. And then some of the lower elevation stuff on the range there was all pure ventonata. So, I mean, we've got a major problem arising, and if we can head it off, that would be great. But I mean, this is a mecca for invasive species here. I mean, we got bullfrogs, we got one that Sean probably worked with was the lake trout. We got, another grass that is Medusa head came in. We've only got a few spots of that, hopefully, and they've been treating them. Cheatgrass kind of seems to be the least of our problems now, especially since we've got a biological agent that takes care of that. But I mean, we could go on and on. There are a ton of invasive species here, clogging waterways. You got the yellow iris. We're always on the lookout for the invasive mussels now. Finding foul bolts coming in through our check stations. So, yeah, I mean, everywhere's in a world of hurt as it is for invasive species, but we keep trying.
Okay, great. Diane, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think, well, I know the invasive mussels are in the Missouri River system, so unfortunately, Shannon, it's heading your way. Right now, it's Oahe is about where it's at, and then zebra mussel, and they're also in the eastern lakes of South Dakota. They've been found there, so the movement is occurring. So we'll just have to wait and see on that one. But I guess hearing what Mitzi was saying about capacity and a couple other folks mentioning that, I think that's one where we need to keep pressing on that. We can have all the competitive grants we want out there, but if tribes can't develop capacity, we're not going to be able to address some of these things very adequately. So, all right, keep up the good work, guys.
All right, thanks, Diane.
Diane.
All right, so just to end it the way we always end it, there's more. We do these webinars every month. It's the third Wednesday or the last Wednesday of the month usually. We've had some weird ones, like April had 5 Wednesdays, or not April, March or something. but on top of that, if there's any other topics you want to check out, the list of what we have planned is on the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society website. So Corey and I are primarily tasked with invasive species, threatened and endangered species support, and wildlife diseases, but we'll help on anything. So if you got projects, things you're thinking, you want to run by us, whatever, feel free to give us a holler or email either one of us, and we can hook you up with the people that can help out or do our best to help you out too. And anything else you have questions on, or the regional conferences are kind of iffy right now, but we're planning the national conference for the society in October in Spokane. For now, we're not sure it's going to be in person yet. We're waiting to see what what COVID does across the country, and Indian country is a little bit ahead of the curve on vaccinations, so we might have a little bit of luck there and get together sooner than everybody else does, but who knows. But thanks for joining us. Thanks very much, Mitzi, for taking the time to do this with us. It's nice to have you. Everybody else told me no, so you're the best director.
My director.
Yeah. So yeah, everybody else take care. Have a nice week, and we'll see you next month, hopefully, or sooner if you need some assistance.
Thank you.
All right, y'all take care.
Yeah,
All
take
right.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Send more information again, because my computer crashed and lost all my email contacts and all that stuff. I was just lucky enough to have this one saved on my calendar.
Okay, Jason. So did you get the email from me? Do you remember?
I can't remember. I just copied and pasted it onto my calendar back before my computer crashed, and I lost all the contacts for everybody for everything. And
Okay. So if you got a pen and paper, I'll just give you my email right now.
Well, or you could just go to our brand new website.
okay.
Inquiry and email into the website. Then you can get in touch with Sean.
Right. Yes.
Alrighty.
Yeah. I have the region that you're in is the one I'm providing support to directly.
Okay.
And so my email is just S as in Sean, and then cross, like they put Jesus on,
Cross.
at NAFWS.org.
Okay.
And I'll look in my contact list to make sure you're in it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. And Corey, are you guys gonna get on the twig workshop this afternoon?
Yeah, that's at what, 2?
I think 1, isn't it?
1? I'm not for sure. I haven't.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Are you going to be on that one too?
Yeah, we want to do it just because that the deadline got extended to June, so that's makes it a little bit easier for us to try to
Is
get
that what
something
you
in.
had? Is that what you were inquiring with me about the grant?
Yeah, earlier in the year, remember we
Yeah.
were chatting about it, but then deadline came, and I guess then it got extended. So we want to.
Okay, well, get in touch with me again if you need to.
Okay, we will. Thanks.
Stuff like that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much again, Mitzi.
Yep. Thanks.
Not a problem. I felt like I felt like a newbie, but hey.
It's fun to have you though.
That's one
I'll
thing.
talk to y'all soon.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
All right. Bye.